truths that should not escape us, of that while we're here, people are marching in what were original liberation concepts emerged from, or the previous wave of liberation. So I'm certain there was more. There's been some previous to the 1960s. I'm just guessing. I wasn't there.
So from the top then, I'd just like to know your name, a little bit about you, and yeah, so who are you?
Oh my goodness. Hi, well, good morning. I'm Susan Gapka. I'm pleased to be here today. I'm a community activist and political organizer. I think for the purposes of this particular interview, I want to talk about queer liberation in my location, in that analysis and in that and in that practice. And so let's go back to the beginning. I was born. I was actually born and raised and socialized as a male. I found that to be incredibly uncomfortable growing up. I learned that I couldn't trust to talk to adults about that because I wasn't able to freely express who I felt I was. So I kept it to myself. Ran away from home as a teenager. It was very, very difficult time for me. A lot of conflict in the family, and I felt there was a lot of abuse, and it's the way I grew up. And I ended up coming to the big city, and ended up becoming homeless on the streets of Toronto for 10 years, and those were really difficult times, and helped shape who I am today. About almost 15 years ago, I was able to get off the streets with some social supports, and found myself at George Brown College studying in the community worker program, and simply because I was told you need an education to get a job, and where are those people now? Because we're going to talk a little bit about disadvantages that people from my background may face, perhaps. Because I think that's an important component of any model of analysis. Did well in the school, and found myself with a bunch of supports in my life. A lot of supportive people and caring people who would help me out, which was a very, very different experience than when I grew up. And decided to explore my conflict with my gender identity, and in second year of the course, I came out. I went to my first Pride Parade. It was a liberating experience. Turns out other people saw me in the Pride Parade. Imagine that. I knew that, but I was a bit floored when I found out when they actually told me. So I came out, and I was working at the City Hall with a counselor, Olivia Chow, and it was quite an experience, a transition, just so to speak. So I left work and came back, changed my name to Susan, and began living as a woman. That was a dramatic, intense change in my life. Found myself working with politicians and realizing that there was a lot of political needs that members of my community and myself needed, and formed a group that eventually became called the Trans Lobby Group. It was a trans health lobby group. And I would say I sort of excelled in a way, or had some successes, and found a place for me to fit in. It was certainly contested. It's the land of oppression, if I may say, and so there's a lot of ideas about how to do that, how to go about trans activism, or what the relationship is very contested with the gay and lesbian community. We have a more invisible community, the bisexual community, which is, but I'm really proud of the strides or the advances that the trans community has made in the last 10 years. I'd like to think, I'd be honored to think that I had somewhat of a role in that, but I have been very, very public and unactive, and three things we like to do in the Trans Lobby Group are educate the public, the media, and politicians on the needs and the lives and the everyday challenges of trans people. to gain political agency for members of the trans community. They lag far behind the gay and lesbian advances that have been made in this country. And we've really developed partnerships. There's not enough trans people out. I mean, more and more people are coming out, more and more people are getting active. We can't say we have 50% of the population and you need to address this, or every third person is left-handed and so we need to have left-handed laws. So what really to be effective is to develop good relationships with other communities and partnerships. And that's where liberation is really helpful, to make the connections between an injustice and an oppression. So those are, how about that for, and you know, yeah, so how about that for an entry? Okay.
Give me 1 second, I gotta change my
Sure.
computer.
I'm going to have a sip then.
Yeah, perfect.
So that was like, how do you say a lot and nothing at the, and not everything, right?
No, that was one.
Much.
But it was good. It was good.
I've been done it. Oh, like who am I? Depend. Okay. So let's move on then. When you're ready.
So you talked about this a little bit, but I'm wondering how you would define your role in the queer movement.
My role in the queer movement. It's an oxymoron question. If I was to try to answer that, if someone had asked me. Been in a leadership role, I would say. I've taken on leadership in a number of communities. Perhaps that's the nugget with queer, because I'm often identified by others. Didn't act, I like to think I'm one of the best at what I do on trans activism in Canada. But other than that statement, I don't go around claiming myself to be a trans activist. But that's how I am documented by others, most likely. Nobody knows I'm a lesbian. Well, you do now. But I work in housing, and I'm an activist. My role, in housing, in homelessness, based on my past experience. I ran for city council and didn't do very well. Very competitive. It's a different game. So I ran for city council and ended up getting elected to the Empowerment Council, a patient advocacy group for mental health and addictions. So I find the irony of that. But there's layers. So when we look at liberation or queer as perhaps, and I think like if I was to define queer, it's hard. Like, what does it mean? Like, not straight. That's kind of broad, and that's what a lot of people will say. But it's fluid. And what fluid means, and that's one of the founding blocks I want to build this conversation on, if I may, around fluidity as it's contradiction. As soon as I say fluid, as opposed to or contrasted to fixed and binary. But let's just go there for a minute. So there doesn't need to be a trans analysis on housing and homelessness. Do we need a shelter for trans people? We need a shelter that accommodates everyone who has a need for housing. We need housing for people who need housing. Trans people and many other people, I would say, meet that need. And so if we look at that as an approach as being fluid, it's not necessarily to have the trans shelter. And I'm using that because that's one of the political conversations we're having about how to house people. And that is, I would say, a critique I have of the rights movement. That it's, the rights movement is, and I'm going to do some, and I went to school for quite a long time. I got a post-secondary education degree. So I need to use my modern and postmodern analysis here. And so if we look at queer liberation or queer theory, We're thinking of fluid. We're thinking of not fixed. Each narrative has its own truth. Nothing is for sure. And when we look at rights movement and LGBT as fixed, I'm trying to tell you that I'm more than just the T in trans. I may be part of an L, and at times in my life I may have been a V, and we're not going to talk about the G, right? A gay experience. But because my life has not been fixed, my truth has not been fixed, so the work should not be fixed. So we find points of entry in the struggle around liberation. And so I think I'd just like to sort of start thinking about it and I'm feeling, I'm just talking like this, I'm feeling a bit fluid already. So I hope I can pull myself together for the rest of the day.
So you took a stab at defining queer. I wonder if you might try to define queer liberation.
Well, in a fluid kind of way, it would be difficult to disconnect. It would be difficult to separate queer from liberation. I would say that both are liberatory in its essence. And if, again, we're going to use a binary contrast for the sake of discussion, as opposed to modern, fixed, one identity, we're one thing, we're either a woman or a man, we're either a gay or heterosexual or homosexual. It's just not that simple. So, but I think liberation sort of implies liberty. And that is packed in neoliberalism. We have, I know there's a theorist, liberty was a founding principle for people who populated and colonized North and South America and other parts of the world. But that's a liberty from oppression. So there's a liberty from oppression, and there's also a liberty to be able. And so I think this is more, not only a liberty from regulation of sexual behavior, which was a founding principle for industrialization. It's all coming back to me. But a system of regulation through medical, psychological, and legal institutions, a liberation from that regulation. And secondly, liberation to, the liberty to live your life as you believe you truly should be, without the confines of those, I can say, I'm thinking political theorists and the names are John Locke, for example, where every man is born in chains, but no, we're all born free, but everyone's, and so as John Locke would say, I think it's John Locke, but everywhere man is born free, but everywhere we are in chains. It's what you do with that, right? It's what you do with that. And so I think really one of the structural changes with the Charter, which protects individual identities, was very fixed and modern. And while it seems to be an advantage in the system we live in, it really limits us in our fluidity of who we are. Like, which ground should I file this human rights complaint under? And so I make a career out of trying to expand those grounds, because for everyone listed on those grounds, sexual orientation, disability, sex, race, ethnicity, there's a ground not included in that. And so we've set up again a binary of who's in and who's out, who's got and who doesn't, and basically it kind of, and then who's got housing, who doesn't have housing.
So I think you started to talk about this. I wonder if we can talk about versus social rights, and perhaps the tension that queer communities feel in pursuing legal rights. And so, if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Baffles me. It baffles me that at times when people, one of the things that I've been eagerly fighting for, or part of the struggle that I've been organizing on, acquiring healthcare service for sex reassignment surgery in Ontario. We got it. Our group played a lead role in it. I've been marked as chair of that group. No stigma there. I'm the sex change girl. I always wanted to grow up, become a woman, change my name to Susan, and be known as a girl who got sex change surgery covered in Ontario. But it was important that people have access to health care. But at the same time we were doing all of that, people would say, but that's, not everybody wants. But it should be there for people who want it, who need it. It's deemed to be a medical necessity. Some people, high rates of suicide in our community. On the other hand, they would say, that was difficult and challenging. So what else do we need? Human rights legislation. And if you trace the analysis of what happened with gay liberation and women's liberation was a set of codified rights in our charter and in our human rights codes. And if you trace back the history of gayness or gay organizing, when it became a rights movement, sexual orientation, spousal rights, including the human rights protection, was one of the early steps in achieving other social and equitable rights, right up to same-sex marriage that we have now in Canada. We're one of the lead, I think the third country in the world to have that. And we're seen as a model for that. And yet while we're seen as a model for gay rights, we're lag behind other countries and other jurisdictions on trans access to rights. So it seemed like a good idea. 8 or 9 out of 10 people in the room would say, good idea, we need explicit, except for sometimes people in government are slow to move. So maybe make it 8 out of 10. So one of those, the ninth out of 10 is the government, who are very slow to act on what's happening in the community, and they always seem to be the last ones. On the other hand, some people say, back to the liberation theory, some people say we need to feed hungry people. We need to feed people and we need to house people. I don't see this as a tension between social and legal rights. Let me strongly propose that we feed hungry people and house homeless people and acquire specific human rights to help to achieve those goals. It's not an either or in a liberation context, because it shouldn't be binary.
That's a great answer. Yeah, that was really good.
Thank you.
So, I'm aware of time. We're at the end of our half hour.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
I wonder if there's, I've got one more question actually, and then we'll go to any last thoughts.
Sure. Oh, I wish we had more time now. That's what I get
Yeah.
for moving slowly.
So I'm wondering what you see as the most important fronts for our movements going forward.
Wow. To write a dissertation on, or a thesis on what is the most important strategic direction for the queer community or the trans community. And I'm not there, so let me put out there that I think that queer liberation in theory is incredibly exciting. I would suggest that it hasn't been accomplished in practice. We're still operating in a structure that has, a rights model, rights are extremely selfish. We need to better understand how to draw those links and sort of unpack how an injury to one is an injury to all. We still operate on instinct in a way. So I think unpacking that, because as I said, like building partnerships, sometimes you have to be specific, but I find, yeah. So back to I think amending human rights codes goes a real long way in so many regards. It's actually is symbolic because, we still have Matthew Shepard's and we still have, gay bashings and bullying in schools. But I have been persuaded that the acquiring of the specific rights goes a long way in educating the public, of building a different understanding of trans people. And you'll even look in the media now. There was an article in the Globe and Mail just a couple days ago on online voting. There's been more, and I suppose even I'm seeing queer through a trans lens, and I suspect that's not common. Maybe in theory, but in practice. It hasn't played out in practice. So I think that's really an important piece to start unpacking. And so as we speak here today, there's people across North America and in Canada occupying Wall Street and occupying Bay Street. And yeah, I think maybe to close on the idea is they're calling themselves the 99% of people who don't have access to jobs, don't access to rights, don't have the 99% without, and the 1% who have. And so perhaps queer, let's join the 99% and recognize that, that all our percentages make a very, very enormous whole. And we can occupy space, and we can occupy locations much more effectively when we're working together.
So given the questions that I've asked and the discussion we've had, is there anything else that you would like to comment on? I'm wondering in particular if you want to say something about the election. I know we wanted to do this interview post-election, so now that it's post-election, do you have any thoughts? Or anything else?
Oh, I have many thoughts on the election. Well, I went to, because I'm not just a trans activist, I actually have interest. I went to the Toronto Argonauts last night and I bought a season's pass. And I was pretty there's a Grey Cups in Toronto, so I'd never been to a Grey Cup. And I really know there's a reason why I mentioned because we're not having any elections, because there's always an election in the fall season. But we have a lot to do. And, take some space and time for ourselves to not just be a queer. So I think we're queer, but we're already, I'm a sports fan. Tomorrow I'm on the waiting list for the Scotia Bank. There's a sponsor marathon. I'm not running the marathon, I'm running 5K, but I'm a runner, I'm a sports fan. I love a good film, good food, and I'm an activist. But as we go forward, really important that we amend the Canadian Human Rights Act. There are 2 private members' bills in Parliament. It's been 8 months and 5 days since the previous bill to amend the Canadian, it has been 8 months and 5 days, February 10th, that the Canadian Human Rights Act, to amend the Canadian Human Rights Act to include gender identity and gender expression, and in the criminal provision, the codes of the provision, blah, blah, blah. Oh,
It's a lot of words.
did you know that it was February 10th, 8 months and 5 days ago, that the Canadian Human Rights Act was passed at third reading in Parliament and went to Senate? And what that would have done, if it had passed Senate, is add gender identity and gender expression to the Human Rights Act and the criminal provisions of the code, of the criminal code. There's 2 bills in Parliament now, to Liberals and NDP. So that is an opportunity we cannot escape. And as symbolic, will give people a better understanding of who trans people are, who queer people are, and is an important achievement in human rights. Provincially, we need to do the same thing, and we've introduced a bill 3 times, and we've got to bring people together from all parties to make sure that the 4th time is a lucky time on achieving our human rights for trans people. So our group will be doing some work on that, and we have Trans Day of Remembrance coming up on November 20th, so that's an important time to highlight, not only grieve people who have been brutally murdered. It's Trans Day of Remembrance was founded in 1999 in San Francisco to commemorate, and it's grown. It's in cities all across the world, and in Canada and Ontario, queer Ontario, and across Ontario. It's an important time not only to mourn and grieve, but to think of how we don't have more names added to that list. And how do we do that? We protect people through human rights. So they have protection in housing, so they have protection in employment, and so we can feed and house homeless people. The other thing is really important is around legal identity papers. And the healthcare still needs to be improved. That's really important. We've made some strides. We need to come back to the provincial government, ensure that access to healthcare for trans people and for queer people is stigma-free, that people can access it whether you live in urban Ottawa or Toronto or in North Bay or somewhere in rural Ontario. That is must. And legal documents, legal identity documents need to be amended. You have a record of birth, but it also records your sex. It's extremely difficult to change that. It requires surgery, and not everyone requires it or needs it. And if we're looking at a rights-based or a binary model, we have male and female. But if we're looking at a liberation model and a fluid model, people will sometimes place themselves at various points upon that scale. All you need to do is ride the public transit, or we'll go down the sidewalk and see that people come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And so it's not binary at all. So it's really important that people who don't neatly fit into those components, the modern components, the binary components, be able to adjust their legal documents to fit how they present, and reduce, and you know, that feeds into social rights of employment, of housing, putting food on the table. So those are 3 of a long, long, long list of things we need. When we cross that off the list, I'm sure there'll be something else to do.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful interview. I think we got a lot of stuff in a short period of time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I'm all thinking fluid and expanded, and I'm off to buy some food and join some people down the street who are
Yes.
um,
Occupying.
who are occupying a
over.
park right down the street,
Good, good.
in peaceful protest, mind you.
Mhm.
We can do more working together.
And we have one interview left today.
Okay. Are we cut?
We are cut.
Okay. Because of time. So I could have gone on and on.